Hello, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and you are watching What Wise Women Want, here on Charlottesville's Public Access Comcast Channel 13. Every week, we bring you programs that are of interest, not just to women, but to everyone. But ladies, we are 52% of the population, with 85% of the purchasing power. What we'd like you to do is use that purchasing power by making informed choices. So our programs are designed to help you and educate you. If you'd like more information about our programs, both the future and past programs, you can go to www.whatwisewomenwant.com, and remember, Wize is spelled with a Z. There you will find TV programs of the past, the women who have been on our panels, and more importantly, information about each of the women on our panels, as well as contact information. If you have any questions for future programs, which are also listed, you can email us the questions and we will gladly ask them on our programs. This evening, we have some amazing women to talk about, believe it or not, grants and raising money for nonprofits. Now, Charlottesville has 400 plus nonprofit organizations. And I thought it would be really interesting to find out about grants and fundraising in this town of not very many people for so many nonprofits. To my right on our panel is Katherine Kobby Hoffman, who is the person who's with the National Organization for Women. To her right is Cynthia Hurst, who's president of Butterflies in Progress. And to her right is Cynthia Colson, who is director of program for the Center for Nonprofit. And we thought, since we had two Cynthias tonight, that we'd call one Cindy and one Cynthia so you don't get too confused. To begin our program, I'd like to first ask you to talk about a little bit about what you do to give people a background in terms of your expertise. So Cindy, would you mind starting off for us?
Certainly, I'd be delighted to. My current role, I'm the Director of Programs, as you mentioned, at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, otherwise known as CNE. And I have the exciting job of providing trainings and services to our nonprofits. We have three focus areas, which is in leadership, management, and collaboration. So all of our trainings and services revolve around those. Our mission is, we believe that the vitality of the community is based on the strength of the nonprofits in that community. So our role is to help our nonprofits to reach their potential in the community.
Okay, Cynthia?
Well, I started Butterflies in Progress 8 years ago. And the name speaks to the transformational chrysalis stage when I'm working with nonprofit organizations, generally helping them with management and fundraising. And I've worked with over 20 nonprofits since I started Butterflies in Progress. When I did that, I had already been managing and fundraising for nonprofits for almost 20 years.
Excellent. Kobby?
I'm been involved with the Charlottesville Regional Chapter of the National Organization for Women since the mid-'80s, and also helped start a local foundation and have served on different boards, as well as I have been involved in grants administration for several decades.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so one of the things I'd like to explain to people who are watching is the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit, because I think it's really important to get that piece of information out, because I don't think people really understand the difference. So would anyone like to take the difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit?
Well, a nonprofit organization generally has a mission that is focused on doing good in the community in one way or another, meeting some sort of service that is needed in the community. Whereas a for-profit is generally focused on making money that then is used, hopefully, to fund nonprofits. So we need both. We can't have one without the other. And then, of course, there's a lot of legalese that's involved in setting one up. There are generally a couple of types of nonprofits. There's a 501c3, which is tax deductible. And then there's a 501c4, which is not. And generally, that's because of the amount of political work that organization is doing, lobbying or something like that. Now, a lot of organizations have a C4 arm so that they can put all of that work into that side.
So is this new mandate, with the political action groups that are raising money, are they C4s? Is that what you're saying?
That's a completely different.
Oh, that's a different. Okay.
So I actually know some organizations that actually have 3 legal statuses.
Some organizations have 3 legal statuses for what purpose?
Well, because they have a foundation that's charitable and educational, and then they have, like you were saying, one that's more politically involved, where you might invite a legislator. And then they also have a political action committee
that funds political campaigns.
Right. So Virginia now has all 3.
Okay. So tell us, is a foundation always a nonprofit? That's another term that gets thrown around an awful lot.
I think so.
I believe
think of any
so.
that aren't.
Yes. I wanted to add, Cynthia, to what you were talking about with the difference. And when we're talking with organizations and we're talking about the difference, we always describe nonprofits as having 2 bottom lines, because one of the myths with being a nonprofit is that you cannot make a profit, and to be a sustainable organization, you need to make a profit to survive. So it's not that nonprofits don't make a profit, just the way they invest it is differently. They don't have shareholders, they have stakeholders in the organization. And then their double bottom line is looking at making a profit, but then also their mission is where they have the double bottom line, which differentiates them from a for-profit organization.
That's
They're
right.
also not taking profits out of it. They're
Yes,
carrying
you're exactly
their
right.
net revenues forward to continue to do good.
Correct.
And maintaining the sustainability of the organization. And of course, there are a lot of other nuanced differences. For instance,
And they roll it over.
I was going to say, for instance, people don't tend to volunteer for for-profit organizations.
Right.
They do so for nonprofits because they are pulled in by their heartstrings one way or another, and that's really, I think, the biggest difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is the heart.
I don't know, I know some very driven people, and their heart is in their work. And they do a lot of good, even though they make a for-profit.
Okay.
Well, I'm thank you for clearing up these distinctions. We'd like to list and discuss the names of some of the nonprofit foundations, but I'm afraid if I do that, we will miss someone, and there are so many in Charlottesville that I really don't want to. Many of the women who have been on the panel have represented nonprofit foundations in the past and will in the future, so we are giving light to some nonprofits on this program. However, I think it's a little unfair if we discussed this earlier, if we really named the kinds of the typical nonprofits that are in town. But I know you know many of them, so they do the kinds of things in this community that are service oriented. So you don't have to go very far, or you can go to the Center for Nonprofit and find out exactly who they are. How's that?
That's perfect. That's right.
And you also have, with the Center of Nonprofit, you have a newsletter or something that goes out to your clientele that asks for volunteers, that people can go to you for whatever it is that if they want to do something in the community. Is that not correct?
That's correct. On our weekly e-newsletter, we have postings for volunteers, nonprofit job postings. It's actually one of our most popular hits that we get. But then we also have grants out there, because we research what's available here locally for the local nonprofits, and we list a minimum of 3 or more that we're able to find. And so that's another big hit for on our newsletter as well, are the grant opportunities.
Okay, so we're going to get to the money part of this.
I keep circling back around.
Now that we've become clear about profit and nonprofit and foundations and all of that, well, we really haven't. I mean, we could get into the 501c3 and all of that, but let's talk about, for example, I'll talk about the legal kinds of things later. Okay. We don't want to bore people in the beginning. So grant writing is one of the main features of people receiving grants, is one of the ways that money comes to Tell us about grants. What are they, and how does it function in a nonprofit, and what happens there? Anybody?
Usually, you have an organization that wants to further their mission, and so they're looking for other organizations that will help them do that. So they write out basically like an application with guidelines on how to apply.
Okay.
Or they might not. They might actually prefer to call you and ask you to apply. So it might be a public thing, or it might be sort of a private thing. If it's more of a public thing, then you can go on the web and you can go to the Foundation Center, and they list every single one that does a tax return, basically, and gives away money.
Okay.
You can subscribe to that for, different circumstances. They give that. You can also ask other people about, who locally does funding, and there's a variety of those as well.
Okay.
So some of them actually want to be anonymous, and some of them want you to give credit in everything you publish.
Okay.
So it's quite a difference, but really you're meeting their mission. So it's important to understand that organization that you're applying to and answer what they ask for, because you're evaluated on that, and you may come up with a whole number of other organizations who are applying for the same pot of money. And so then they decide how they're going to evaluate you, and they decide how much they're going to give you and for what period of time. And when it's a grant, your expenses have to be within that period of time. And sometimes they ask you to contribute or to find others to contribute to the project, so they don't fund the whole thing.
Okay.
That help?
So, and did you wanted to add to that? You're okay. So one of the things that Kobby brought up was the fact that, when you receive, this is a very small town, okay? And there are so many nonprofits in this town. How does the money, really, how can you possibly divvy out the few grants that are available to be able to, spread out so much money to so many different organizations? What's happening there? Cynthia, do you particularly just focus on local grant agents?
Well, I think to Kobby's point, you want to look and see what foundation is most interested in the work that you're doing. You're working to help them forward their mission through your work. I think it's key whenever you're doing any sort of fundraising to remember that it's really about the mission of your organization, which is to serve the community in one way or another. And you're really just a pass-through as an organization of people's funds to serve the community. And it's important for people to keep that in mind whenever they're fundraising. Because when you're communicating with donors, whether it's a foundation or an individual or corporation, or whoever you're asking for money, what they're most interested in is what your impact is going to be, and how you're going to make the community a better place. So I think that's key no matter who you're asking for money.
And I totally agree with that. And you're seeing it more with grantors, and even with a lot of major donors now are asking for different kinds of evaluation and metrics where you're actually measuring the impact of the work that you're doing.
So that means that you have to come up with numbers in terms of what you're doing. And I know this to be true because every time somebody is on our television program, they want to know how many people watch the program online, how many people watch it on Comcast, and so everybody is justifying with numbers these days. But my question is, how can you justify numbers when you're just starting out a program? What is it, how is it that you can, write a grant and be able to think a year or 2 years in the future in terms of helping people to, I think that's one of the stumbling blocks, of trying to get grants, is that people can't figure out how to make it feasible numbers-wise because they have no idea. It might be new programs, so to speak. Do you have any help for that?
I think it goes back to the case of support that's written, and every grant that you pursue requires a case of support, that you articulate what your objectives are. And Kobby, you have more experience with grants than I do, but I know every grant has required some sort of number associated, even if the projection's different. And generally grants have some sort of reporting mechanism in place, so you can do course corrections during that grant cycle. So if you find that your numbers aren't falling where you had projected, you can offer some explanations and reassess where you're going with that grant during that reporting process with them.
Yeah.
Cynthia, you write. I know you write grants.
I do, but I look at it as just one avenue for raising funds. And I would say for an organization that's just getting started, grants might not be their best avenue. It's often best to go to those whom you know. I often take clients back to the point at which they're most familiar. Perhaps they've done a walkathon, and who do you go to when you're trying to fill up that sheet of, if I walk so many miles, I'll get so much money? And you don't stand on the corner and ask people you don't know. You call up your friends, you talk to people at your church, whatever. That's how you raise money. And really, that's the best way to raise money as far as I'm concerned. You know, I started out raising money going door to door, knocking as a canvasser in Baltimore in the 80s.
Wow.
And, you know, you learn pretty fast that you have to make that connection with the person. And you need to do a lot of things that I learned a lot of those skills initially from that. But the key is to find that connection with the other person. Whether it's a foundation or an individual or a company that has a certain mission.
So you're better off, what you're saying is kind of raising the $5 or $10 from friends kind of thing, rather than attempting to do huge grants and those types of things initially when you're first starting out.
Well, I think, I don't know the $5, $10. I think trying to find friends or friends who have friends that can write you slightly larger checks with more zeros.
The interesting thing is this is one thing I love about this town, is somebody sees a need, right? And then they create a nonprofit to meet that need, right? If it becomes profitable, then it moves into that arena. If it becomes something that's really a great need, then sometimes it actually becomes, a government program. Mm-hmm. So we've all seen this kind of thing happen. But when you see something that needs to happen and you're compelled that way and you connect to others, then they're more than willing to help you. Does that make sense? And so then you have that sort of mutual thing. I mean, you can even announce you're going to hold a meeting, and then people show up, and you decide, okay, let's start here. Let's try this. And sometimes I've actually had situations where somebody says something, you say, oh, that's a great idea. And the other person goes, yeah, totally, I'll put money into that. And those kinds of things, very often, they are heartfelt, like you were saying before, and they just happen. They just snowball.
Right. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment. I know at CNOW, the other thing that we really encourage if someone comes in, they're wanting to start a nonprofit, is we always encourage that they do what we call an environmental scan to see what's out there, because if they can partner with an existing nonprofit and they're bringing their passion and their love and their relationships and friends to that existing nonprofit, that just increases what that nonprofit that's currently in existence can do. So that's one of the first steps we encourage, is do an environmental scan, just to make sure that someone's not meeting that need already, maybe in a different way.
Or you can't, as you say, just join them to increase their impact and meet maybe perhaps a more nuanced need that they're talking about.
So maybe they might develop a program. So instead of a whole nonprofit, they might develop the program underneath this nonprofit. So it's meeting that bigger need. And then that opens opportunities for grants. Again, those relationships get incorporated into that existing nonprofit.
Right.
Not to mention you don't have to go through the paperwork of forming a nonprofit.
There you go. So a lot of positives to doing that. And recruiting a board and all of the other things that are involved.
Yes, there are.
So
win-win.
So let me understand you. So a nonprofit that's doing a program is, let me understand you, see if I'm understanding you, is that somebody sees a program that they want to do, or something small, rather than starting a nonprofit, they just do the program.
Well, that's what we would encourage, exactly. Again, to kind of do that environmental scan to see what nonprofits are out there that are doing things similar to the need that this individual has identified, and then approaching that existing nonprofit and say, this is an additional need that fits under the umbrella. Let's say they're working with young children and they've identified an additional need with young children. Let's say that they need sports equipment for some of the schools. And so this program that's working with young children say, well, I would like to be a part of your nonprofit, but I can develop a program focused on sports equipment that can help with that. And so incorporate that into the existing nonprofit instead of pursuing their own nonprofit status.
Well, I know myself, I feel really comfortable about, researching and doing statistics and, so that part of the grant process is really, I feel comfortable with, probably because I'm in academia, but the part of going out and asking people for money, even my friends, just doesn't feel comfortable to me, And so we're talking about both aspects of this grants and fundraising because I know myself, I feel comfortable with one part of raising money for a nonprofit, but the other side of going to ask for money, I'm just, there's just no way that, I feel comfortable. Cynthia and I have had this conversation. I just,
But I had a client who just sent me an email the other day, and she's finally at the point where she's scheduling the meetings and going by herself. We had to start out with, okay, you invite them to lunch and I'll go along, and we just kept working with it, and now 6 months down the road, she's making the phone. So it is something that you can ease into, and someone like myself or whoever else you want to choose as a helpful coach can work you through. Just like a lot of things, it is a learned skill.
Well, I don't mind going up and asking the first time, but they'll say, well, let me read it over and get back to me, and I never follow through. I'm like, well, they really didn't want it, so I don't want to deal with this. So I understand how a lot of nonprofits will go towards grants as opposed to trying to do fundraising, or because they just are uncomfortable with asking people for money and would much rather do the paper route or the research route as opposed to that way.
Well, the one thing that I would say with people working with nonprofits, if you're looking at Giving USA report that comes out on an annual basis, the percent that comes from grants is actually a very small percentage of the money that supports a nonprofit. The vast majority of money comes from individuals that support nonprofits.
Which is why I encourage you and others to ask individuals.
So if you're pigeonholing just for grants, you're missing a huge piece of the pie.
Interesting.
Which
and that huge piece of the pie is a lot more predictable.
Yes, it is.
First of all, it can be a much broader base. You can have a lot of individuals giving. If you're relying on just a few foundations to fund your organization, if one of them decides not to do that anymore, you're in big trouble. You're going to have to cut staff, move your office, whatever. So it makes a lot more sense to have a lot of individuals giving. And major donors, I think there's a lot of money still left on the table. We're not tapping that resource nearly as much as we could.
I agree.
And when you're talking about actually what we call making the ask is the term that you'll hear.
Making the ask
is the term.
Write it down.
Is in the world of fundraising, it's called making the ask. And having been executive director at Kobby Regional Hospital Foundation, one thing that I learned early on is that when I would sit down with a donor, our prospect, or potential donor, is that I would always phrase that I'm asking you to join me because I always contributed myself.
Oh yeah,
yes, absolutely.
To the mission of that. So then I'm asking them to join me in making a difference, and that really changed the tenor of the conversation, so that I wasn't asking them to do something that I wasn't committed and passionate about myself, and was willing to put my money on the line as well as the person I was asking to do the same.
That's a very interesting point as well. That's a very interesting point that I hadn't even thought of before. I mean, presenting it that way is...
That this is something you've invested in, and you're asking them to do what you're doing.
Exactly.
I think also a little trick that you can sometimes use is, close your eyes and visualize how you feel when you're writing a check to a nonprofit.
That's good.
And that is the feeling that you're allowing the other person to have. When you're writing a check to a nonprofit organization, you feel good about that organization and you feel good about yourself. You wouldn't do it otherwise.
Exactly. And remember, nonprofits, we're throwing this term around, but your church is a nonprofit. Some of the organizations you belong to, and probably most of them are nonprofits. The places where you socialize a lot of times are nonprofits. So it's not just places like shelter for people who are homeless, the obvious kinds of ones, or special, people handicapped or things like that. But many of the places where you go on a continuous basis are often nonprofits, and probably something you need to think about when you are being asked to donate, because all of these places are, and since it's in Charlottesville, there are very many places who are nonprofits. You are watching What Wise Women Want. I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, here on Charlottesville Public Access Comcast Channel 13. Today we're talking about grants and fundraising for nonprofits. You can find out more information about our topic and about our panelists on www.whatwisewomenwant.com, and Wize is spelled with a Z. And there you can find contact information for each one of our guests and our panelists, who are, to my right, Katherine Kobby Hoffman, who's with the National Organization for Women.
You can just call me Kobby.
Okay, Kobby. And to her right is Cynthia Hurst, who's president of Butterflies in Progress. And to her right is Cynthia Colson, who's the director of programs for the Center of Nonprofit in Charlottesville, Virginia. Now, let's get back to, we were on such a roll, but I wanted to make sure we got that in before we got any farther. So let's talk about the fundraising aspect.
Yeah, I wanted to comment a little bit about what we were talking about. I agree with you in terms of things, but I think if you talk about what you'd like to see happen, what you are doing, what your experiences are, and people agree with you, then they'll actually say, what do you need? So it's one of those things where you were talking about how you are like mind. Mm-hmm. It's something you both feel strongly about, you both feel good about, you want to see it happen. And so you just basically join forces and have that happen. Now, sometimes with a starting organization, so what we did is we got everybody around, everybody put in the names of everybody they could think of that they thought was of like mind, and then we wrote out a letter, one-page letter, and we sent it out with a little, envelope and a return card, and I was astounded.
Really?
People are so generous.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you really don't, you're saying you don't necessarily have to go face to, I guess I was contacting all the wrong people, but no, it was actually people I did not know that I was going to. So, but what you're saying is to, and I feel like I am passionate about all the things that I do. And that passion is definitely contagious.
Yeah.
But somehow the hurdle of asking for money just,
I just don't
roll off the tongue.
I don't usually bring it up until somebody else does, actually.
Uh-huh.
Because that's not what I really care about. What I really care about is getting something accomplished and doing X, whatever it is. And if they care about it as much as I do, they're rolling up their sleeves and doing it too. So then it just sort of, all those other things just sort of happen.
Excellent.
Does that make sense?
Sometimes.
Well, sometimes you struggle. That's true. Sometimes you do.
Well, my next question then, to a little bit piggyback on then, it's slightly off the course a little bit, but I've noticed, and I've had a lot of nonprofits in my experience, that when it comes to volunteers, everybody gets all excited about volunteering, and then all of a sudden, no one shows up, for the event or whatever it is that you're doing. People just doesn't show up. Do you find that true, about volunteering? What's the percentage of people who say they're passionate about what you're doing and actually show up?
Well, I haven't done a study on that yet, but
Because I think that is part of the grant fundraising kind of thing. Although we're not paying for people, it's kind of in-kind service,
Oh, it
which
is,
is
absolutely.
paid. Yeah.
Well, and volunteer management is
it's
a
a
huge
resource.
piece of what a nonprofit does, because it's your human resources.
Right.
You're exactly right. So that's
Right.
your human resource department that's managing your
Exactly.
volunteers. And we have many nonprofits in our community who have no staff.
Right.
And that's solely just volunteers
Right.
that's operating it. And so how do you keep them engaged?
Yes.
I would think that the process would be somewhat similar to what a donor is, because the way you keep a donor engaged is that you make sure they're part of the mission and they know what's going on, and you have some sort of regular reporting. So it's not just that you're there with them at the time that they're volunteering, but how do you keep those touch points going when they're not there as well? And then the other thing is the match. Being sure that that person that walks in the door wants to volunteer has the skills that you're looking for. So you're not doing a mismatch there,
yeah.
because that means that they'll step away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
if
It
it's
also
not a good
needs to
match.
be something that they really want to do.
Of
because
course,
just
yes.
because they're a CPA doesn't
You're
mean
right.
they want to help you with your books. Maybe
And many
they
times it's not actually. They
want to do something
different.
else.
Yeah, right.
They want to do something. They're tired of doing that. So
Right.
you want to make sure.
You're right.
And I think communication is key. Both directions. Sometimes we think just because we
right.
send out an email and let everyone know what's going on, then we've communicated, but we haven't heard from them.
Right.
So I think it's important too to make sure you're getting feedback from your volunteers, just like you are with your donors.
Feedback meaning you're calling them and returning the calls rather than just emails and communicating with them, is what you're saying.
Well,
face
that,
to face,
or
whatever.
maybe you're sending out a questionnaire,
Right,
or
okay.
however you want to get feedback from your volunteers, so you are allowing them to have some say in your organization. And these are people that are investing their time,
Oh, yeah.
and you want to make sure that you're listening to them because they see things perhaps you aren't seeing. They're a good resource for information about your organization that you might not even know.
I'm glad we got on this topic because I think it's really important. I've seen organizations think of their volunteers as something other than employees who just aren't being paid and don't treat them accordingly as resources.
Oh, volunteers are gold.
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
also a
doesn't
good
get
source
better.
of donors.
And
Right.
potential board members.
Yes.
As well.
Exactly.
Because they're invested in the organization. They're giving their time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the structure of how people can participate, because in-kind service or people are resources in terms of nonprofits. So what kinds of ways? Okay, so you alluded to boards. Do all nonprofits need boards of directors?
Yes, it's required.
Okay, so if you volunteer as a board member, what does that do? I mean, what do you do, and what kind of responsibilities are there, and how does that work?
Oh, I can start this off.
Okay.
Boards go through a life cycle. So it also kind of depends on where you are in the life cycle of the nonprofit. So some boards are actually a working board, meaning that they're actually the volunteers in there feeding the homeless, providing clothes. And then as the organization continues to evolve and mature, then it goes more into governance. And that's where they're out of the day-to-day and they're ensuring that the compliance is in place, the strategic plan is in place. They're looking at the big long-term picture and once they're into that governance mode. And then it's very typical for nonprofits to cycle back around for a multitude of reasons. So there is a life cycle, so the work that you're doing on a board is really going to depend on where the nonprofit is in its evolution.
Excellent. And you also have boards of directors, but you also have advisory boards too, correct?
You can.
Yeah.
You can. And often boards have committees.
Absolutely.
Of course, depending on how large the organization is.
To work, and very often they may work on some particular thing and report back to the board, or a board member or members may be part of the committee.
So we've talked about a lot of complicating factors in terms of nonprofits. What are the benefits to being a nonprofit as opposed to a for-profit? I mean, why should I want to, if I'm just starting out an organization or whatever, what is the benefit to being a nonprofit as opposed to being a for-profit business organization that's doing something for the community? Any thoughts about that?
Well, it depends on how you want to bring your money into your organization.
Okay.
People rarely write a check to a for-profit. They can't get a tax deduction, although that's low on the reasons that people give. It's basically how you want your funds to come in. If you want to be a for-profit organization that does good in the community, Then you have to figure out, okay, well, how you're going to raise your money. What are you going to do to bring money in?
Like charging fees or selling things or whatever. Okay. But you can do that with a nonprofit too. You can have memberships.
A
and things
nonprofit,
like
usually their purpose is that charitable or educational type function.
Okay.
Whereas with a for-profit, very often they have a particular function and then they're taking the profits and contributing to things that they appreciate
Okay.
and want to see more of.
More
in
and
the
more
community.
for-profits are forming foundations
Right.
to
do so.
forward those needs.
So they take so a for-profit takes their profits and puts them into a nonprofit to
Some
get
portion,
tax,
yeah.
to get tax, so it's
Well,
benefits
a
them.
variety of things. They,
PR.
yeah, I mean, right. There's a multitude of reasons
Well,
why
give
you
us
want to
some.
improve your community. Well, like you said, it can be a public relations type thing. It could be they have a family member or something, and they really feel strongly about that.
Okay.
Perhaps a
it
family
could
member
be-
had cancer, for
Yeah,
instance.
it can be a multitude of reasons.
Okay.
But we all benefit, right?
Okay, yes, exactly. So one of the things I think that people don't understand, and I found people tell me this once they get to a nonprofit, let's say, okay, they filled out the paperwork and they now have their 501c3 from the federal government and think that is the end. And so give us a little bit of information about the other kinds of things one has to do. So we've now got a federal tax ID number, but what happens, let's talk about the state of Virginia since here we are. So what happens in the state of Virginia if I want to function as a nonprofit? What else do I need to do?
You need to file articles of incorporation.
Okay, with the state.
Right, the State Corporation Commission. And then you also need to register with the state to let them know that you're fundraising.
Okay, and what department do you register with?
Do you remember?
Yes, it's
It's
the
the
U.S. Farm and Agriculture.
It's
Okay,
Agriculture and
okay.
Consumer
Yes, that's
Services.
what it is.
That's what it is.
Virginia, it's not U.S.
Consumer Services,
yes,
I couldn't
thank you.
remember.
And the reason I'm going in that direction is because why is it in the Department of Agriculture
And Consumer Services.
one has to register for, it seems a bit odd.
Well, they stuck Agriculture and Consumer Services together.
I see.
So it's like one thing.
Okay.
So it's really under the Consumer Services
Okay.
part.
All right, so then we get that little piece of paper, and then we move on to, all right, now I want to work with the University of Virginia or an agent like that. Do I need to do something else?
What do you mean work with them?
Well, if they're going to pay me, do I need to have, besides I have now state and I have nonprofit status with the federal government, but what do I need to do with the University of Virginia in order to be able to have a relationship with them as well?
Are you talking about them as they would be sponsoring, they would be giving you money?
Yes. Aren't there requirements in order to be able to be a part
Yeah,
of
I'm
their
not sure
organization?
that's the best example, but whether it's a more sort of institutional foundation or whether it's more a closely held individual or family type foundation, some of those, the most easily accessed, are the ones that are made public, so that you know that you apply by a certain deadline, and that you have to include, the abstract saying what you're going to do. You have to include your experiences or background. You have to include a budget, which is sort of your best guess of how the money would be spent. Those kinds of things.
So, yeah, we've kind of
How
circled
you'd be
back to how you apply for
evaluated.
money.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons that I'm talking about all these things is because I want people to understand that, it seems we don't want to make this sound like an easy road here, nonprofit foundations, that there are hoops, so to speak, that one must jump through, and there are certain bits of paperwork you have to, fill out. Income tax reforms, state tax reform, you have to apply for all that paperwork as well. And one of the things I wanted to get to was also, all of your work is about helping people to get to this place of, because filing for a 501c3, anybody, if it's a church or whatever it is a rigorous task. I mean, one has to prove what one is doing. So it behooves people, correct me if I'm wrong, to connect with you all to be able to get the kind of information that they need in order for either you to help them with this process or for them to be able to hand over this frankly, for some people, it's a huge task just to get the 501c3. So, is this the kind of thing that you help people do?
At CNE, we provide resources for all of that, for starting your own nonprofit. So just by contacting CNE on our website, we have lots of information that we can provide to someone who's wanting to start their own.
Do you help them with the grant writing or anything like that?
We do not, in terms of having someone on staff
Or
who does grant
fundraising?
writing,
Yeah.
but we do provide trainings.
Okay, so you do that.
So you need to learn about the process, but the actual writing of the grant usually is done by the person who is making the proposal of what they want to see happen.
Okay.
And it's actually probably best if you write it sort of in the third person of what you guys would be doing if you could have started yesterday.
Okay.
That you're that ready.
Right.
That you could have started yesterday.
Excellent.
And because when somebody's going to give you money, there's a variety of sources. I mean, you could go and apply to the state government. You could apply to the federal government. I mean, you could apply to the European Union. I mean, or you can apply to somebody who happens to be your neighbor, down the street, right? So there's a variety of sources. It's a matter of trying to put that together and make sure it works. And the connector to me always is that you have a like mind on trying to reach some aspect of that mission, right? To accomplish something.
And keeping in mind that grants are about 5% of your budget.
And they're delayed as well, because
Yes.
if you send out an appeal letter, well then there will be money that comes back shortly thereafter, which is very pleasant. And then it keeps coming in because people save it for when they do their income tax or, particular time of year before the holidays. With a grant, you usually submit it at a particular point in time. They say, submit this by April 1st. So you have to have it to them, whether it's by the web or whatever. You can't be late. You're better if you're early, so you have a little lead time.
So, really the grant writing or the getting the 501c3 and the state is a benefit for the people who are, because it legitimizes you in some aspect for, being able to know that, you are serious about this and this is a legitimate enterprise. So it kind of gives a little bit of support to the people who are giving you money rather, anybody can go out and say they're a nonprofit and, that kind of thing. But this really gives the opportunity, and people get, you can use it for tax deductions as well. So.
Well, it tells donors that you've had to jump through a certain amount of hoops,
Right.
that you have a board of directors in place, and that probably gives them peace of mind when writing a check to you. Yes.
And it's also a very long process. I mean, to submit the 501c, the first stage of it, the 501c3, takes about 6 months before one,
That's right.
goes through the whole process. And no matter how good you have it, whether you have an attorney writing it and everything else, it takes time to get through the federal government.
And the incorporation with the state and the registering
Yep.
with the state, and it helps if you can, get the assistance of an attorney and a certified accountant or
Right.
someone with that kind of background, and particularly if they're willing to donate their time, it's a real gift.
And God forbid the
get you
government shut
started.
down. It delays you even more.
Well, if you're dealing with applying to a government one, then you really are looking at putting it in, and you may not get a response for 9 months. If you're putting into a foundation, then it's probably whenever they have their next board meeting. So it might be 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
So it can be completely different.
And I also want to say, just applying and receiving your nonprofit status is only part of that process, because there's also the annual 990. So it's not that, yes, I have my nonprofit status and all the paperwork's finished. That's not the case. And the 990 is becoming much more structured and much more involved each year. And I know they just made some major changes again this year with the 990s. So
well,
bear that in mind.
Now that we've really gotten everyone bogged down in all the paperwork and not done,
And it continues.
All right, let's talk about fundraising now. So, you know, obviously that's the majority of where people get there. Now, we talked about asking friends and family and all that kind of thing, but what other kinds of opportunities are there for raising money? I mean, we can talk about bake sales and, you know, things of that nature. And I don't know about you all, but I know myself, I receive constantly every week somebody's doing a fundraiser somewhere to do something, especially in this town. So what kinds of things can people do to do fundraisers besides going around soliciting money from friends and family?
A great thing that I discovered in Culpeper was really to be promoting third-party fundraising. So a third-party fundraiser is where your staff is not engaged, but you have, let's say you have a corporation who really agrees with the mission that you're doing, and they may do a fundraiser within their own business to raise money, but they initiate that and they guide that process. So the beauty of a third-party fundraiser is it requires very minimal staff involvement if you can engage people in that level. And it can even go to where someone might do a run, or they might host an event. That'll be a third-party fundraiser for you. So that's another opportunity as well.
You mean like it could be a breakfast, or it could be a wine tasting, or it could be anything you can think of.
Yes, and so then what you're doing is you're engaging the person who's organizing that event, that you're helping with just a minimal amount of staff support for them to actually promote that third-party fundraising. So that's another avenue of engaging people in a very different way, especially if you have very limited staff capacity.
And people can all go for the like reason, and they can all enjoy themselves and have a good time and feel good.
That's the way they're money. And I've seen everything in this town, from pancake breakfast to, you know, going to the grocery store, to the, you know, balls at night, to the wine tastings, to, I mean, everyone has become very, very, to the secondhand stores raising money for another nonprofit, to, I mean, this community is so creative in terms of bringing out people to fundraise that it's amazing. And it seems to be a win-win for everybody rather than just for the nonprofit itself. You are getting something in the process besides for feeling good about whatever it is that's happening. So what we're saying is that the nonprofit solicits from whatever this business is to do something or other. And let's say you go to a wine tasting, and what happens is part of the money for what you pay for your wine is contributed to the nonprofit, which is a very creative way to do fundraising. And then you invite all of your friends and family, and they're not just handing you money, but it's also, you know, they're enjoying themselves in the process. So I've seen this in so many different ways in terms of the creativity of this community and fundraising. Are there any other types of things that we should know about in terms of fundraising?
Sometimes somebody, you know, might be speaking or something that is related, and so, you know, you may actually organize a dinner or something that's going along with it, so that people pay to come to hear the dinner and to join all together and hear the speaker. Sometimes people piggyback on that with a silent auction, where people contribute items, or you ask for items, and then people, you know, will say how much they want to have that item. And even a dinner, if a lot of people might be contributing the cost of the dinner, so it may not cost you for the dinner, right? So I think those who are really good at it end up with everything already covered from all directions. So everything is a plus.
Right.
Does that make sense?
That's a great idea. It's a very good idea.
Oh, I was just going to say, if your event is large enough and you're doing enough publicity, then you can get businesses to sponsor the event, and that's when you can really make good money for your organization, because a business wants to piggyback on the good PR that your nonprofit can bring, and have their logo on all of the publicity that you have for the event, whether it's the tickets or the emails or the invitations that you send out or the ads that you run in the paper or whatever.
Or sponsor a table if there's.
That's right. Have their sign on the table.
So the best way to, and I think everybody in this town has become creative because there are so many nonprofits with, within such a small community that this is how everyone, I lived in huge cities and was associated with nonprofits, and I never saw as much creativity as I see here because everybody's attempting to vie for the same dollars. And it seems the only way to do that is to create these win-win situations where you're not just asking for money, but somebody is getting something in return.
Oh. It is a win-win, and I think the quality of life in our community is really impacted by it.
I agree.
But I also find that when you're just, you and the volunteers, and you all and your board are all trying to do something, that sometimes you're just astounded because you will get anonymous gifts. You don't know where they came from. You don't know why you got it. You just know somebody's saying thank you. And there's that aspect to it as well, which is, just warms everybody's heart.
Exactly, it's a good feel good.
Just invigorates you to go do some more.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, just in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which is a publication that comes out regularly, they were highlighting the top 50 donors in 2013. And one of the donors made a multi-million-dollar gift to the Salvation Army, and prior to that, he'd only made $20 gifts.
Wow.
But his bequest was multi-million. And we haven't
that's a good
talked
point.
about planned
Yes.
giving.
I was going to piggyback on her, and then you brought it up. So
Yes, planned giving is a whole other piece of
All right, let's talk
philanthropy.
about that. Go ahead.
Well, planned giving is going to be generally for your more established organizations, and you're definitely looking at a relationship that is generally longer term. And planned gifts are those that come from a donor. Many times it's a bequest. That's usually what I have seen, but it could be a charitable trust. There are 12 different, there are many different options of planned gifts. But these are people who have some capacity and they want to give, and some want to give during their lifetime in different vehicles and channels, and others want to, as I said, do a bequest, and that's generally the most prevalent.
And usually as you just stated with your story, usually the most likely donors for planned giving are those who have been giving long term.
Yes, he had been
It's not the
giving,
amount that they've been giving, it's the longevity.
Yes, he'd been given $20 for years to the Salvation Army.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
he had the opportunity to give more, and he did.
Yeah.
Or she, right.
So it was a bequest. So
Yeah.
upon passing, you can give your house, your estate, whatever, and then you can give a much larger gift at that point. Some people can't give more than $20 a year or a month or whatever, and but when they pass, then they no longer need their home.
And the ones that warm my heart a lot are sometimes when you're helping other people and they're receiving the help you give and they give.
Right.
That, and usually when you think about what percentage they're giving, it's huge, right? And then, you feel more validated as well.
That's an excellent point, an absolutely excellent point. I noticed that, in terms of church giving, a lot of people, tithe is what it's generally called, and a lot of people give us so much more than, they even possibly really, when you think about it, can afford, because they feel so passionate about what it is that they're giving for. But, I love the idea of the long-term person who's been giving for years, then all of a sudden, I think of, donations for people who I've known who gave donations to NPR and National Public Radio and National Public Television, and they die, and all of a sudden it's, they were giving small amounts whenever the fundraisers were, and then all of a sudden at the end of their lives donated whatever it is that they had in their, they
Estate.
bequeathed their estate to, this passion that they had. And you're right, people sometimes don't have it in their lifetime or want to hold on to it to make sure they have enough before they die, and then at the end, end up giving a tremendous amount to something that they really believe in. And, these are all important things we need to look at. And I'm so glad you brought up, that grants are just a part of this, kind of opportunity for people. And to find people who are passionate about the kinds of things that you do. I know in my experience that when I go out there and tell people, well, we'll be thinking about doing this project, and all of a sudden you're inundated with, I want to be on your board of directors, you know, I want to be a part of this project. I'm amazed at, you know, when people become passionate, how much, no matter, and you know, they might be on other boards or be on other projects, but if they're passionate about it, you know, they really, if it touches their heart and soul, and I think that's what nonprofits really, really do for people. It helps them to, you know, give a part of themselves that, and sometimes in our culture, you know, in our American culture, we're so predominantly thinking of capitalism and money, and you know, this is the way that people are balancing their lives, you know, in terms of giving. I'm a Masterpiece Theater person, and I just revel in how many names get added to Masterpiece Theater. You know, every year, you know, there seems to be more and more people donating to that particular cause because they believe in it.
Well, isn't it really about making a difference?
Exactly.
I think that's part of being just human.
Exactly.
Is that we want to make a difference. And for so many people, unfortunately here in Charlottesville, that's through supporting nonprofits.
Well, that's an excellent point. In our last few minutes, I want to give each of you an opportunity to say whatever it is that you'd like to say that we probably haven't covered, to take about, you know, 30 seconds to talk about something that, or to summarize or whatever.
When you're starting with me, thank you. Let me see, so what do I think
Cindy?
is a big takeaway for this? I think most importantly is for people who want to be engaged in nonprofits, there are a lot of opportunities for that, so I certainly encourage for them to pursue those opportunities. And then I also would encourage them to know when they're looking to be engaged with a nonprofit, to know what they're wanting out of that relationship. That has certainly been one of the challenges when I've worked with volunteers or even with some board members, is really having a clear understanding of what they're wanting, because it's a reciprocating relationship, what the nonprofit needs and what that individual is seeking. And so I would encourage people to identify that as they're building that relationship with a nonprofit.
Excellent. Cynthia?
Well, I believe that nonprofits make a big difference for our economy. You know, the economy is the big talk for the last however many years, I guess forever, but lately we've been very concerned about it. And I think that investing in a nonprofit makes a big difference in our overall economy. You said there are, you know, a lot of nonprofits here in Charlottesville, and that's true. And we have fared quite well compared to the rest of the country during this time. And I think that nonprofits are in large part to thank for that. They help to create a safety net for those who need the assistance during these tough times, and help to make our community a place that people with funds want to move to. In addition to a lot of other things. So I think that it's important to remember that nonprofits make a big difference in our community, and to do what you can to support them.
Kobby?
I would say that personally, and I would encourage others to seriously consider the quality of your community, the quality of life of your community, and contributing to that. And yes, we have a lot of things that come first. You know, we need to take care of our families and work and household, but you know, eat a little, sleep a little, and then go out and volunteer. It's a lot of fun. You meet wonderful, wonderful people, and you actually can accomplish a lot.
I want to thank our panelists. This has been an amazing conversation. You are listening to What Wise Women Want here on Comcast Channel 13. And what we've been talking about is grants and fundraising for nonprofits with Kobby Hoffman, Cynthia Hurst, and Cynthia Colson. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again next week. Have a good evening.